Greetings all, BWS2K here again. I first want to open by saying a hearty welcome to all the new subscribers. This isn't my usual kind of content, but I'm sure if you stick around, you'll find something you like. I appreciate you being here. If you haven't watched the deep dive series that I've been doing, I covered every Marrow appearance in Marvel Comics. And that's okay. If you haven't seen that, that's fine. This video is just a bit of a summary for anyone who is interested, and I'm just going to throw in all the different images that we had, and they'll just be kind of scrolling in the background as I talk. So there's that. But this is mostly audio, so you're not going to be missing anything if you're just listening to it in the background and want to know a little bit about the character Marrow. So let's get started. And I brought my water again. I remember to do that. I'm being a good YouTuber. Okay, so Marrow's background is messy, but the gist is that she is a Morlock. She was born in a tunnel network below Manhattan, where she spent her first several years of life. And she witnessed the Mutant massacre firsthand. She was there for that, and she remembers that. Sarah's mother was pinned beneath some rubble and begged Gambit, who was part of the Mutant massacre. He was there, and he was fleeing, and she begged him to rescue her daughter. And he did. So Sarah, as far as I could tell, is never made aware of the fact that Gambit actually had a role in initiating the Mutant massacre. He played a big role in that, but it was kind of retconned in later on. And as far as I could find, she never learns the truth about Gambit's role in that whole situation. Later on, before she fully manifests her mutation, and I think that's a really important key there, she obviously had some manifestations of her mutation before, like the adolescent, teen, typical age of mutation kind of fully coming out. So before she fully manifested that mutation, she was transported by Mikhail Rasputin along with most of the remaining Morlocks at that time to a bleak dimension where the only rule was survival of the fittest. It was kind of a pocket dimension. It was harsh. Everyone was fighting constantly to reach Mikhail's citadel, which was atop a sort of central hill. The whole dimension was kind of basically a big wasteland that rose in the center. And so it's often called the Hill Dimension. And there in the Citadel was possibly some peace, like a good night's sleep, some protection from the harsh sun, and that sort of thing. So there was just a constant fighting, a constant striving to get there. Sarah is one of the few who actually did succeed at that. She did reach the top. And she went on with several other second-generation Morlocks who grew up there to create, and Sarah actually led Gene Nation. And they made their way back to Earth, where, thanks to time dilation, they were adults, even though a much shorter time had transpired in this dimension. So time traveled quicker in the Hill Dimension. So she left as a child, came back as an adult. For her, it was 20 years, or for them, it was 20 years. But for here in this dimension, it was only a shorter period of time. The group went on, Gene Nation went on to engage in terrorist acts of vengeance against humanity for their perceived treatment of the Morlocks, which resulted in Marrow's apparent death after Storm ripped out her heart to prevent a series of bombs from detonating. She'd basically rigged a bunch of hostages with bombs, and the bombs are going to explode, and the only way to stop them was to deactivate the bomb that she had on her own heart, and Storm eventually ripped that out, and she was left for dead, presumably, to both the characters present and the reader. Much later, though, it was revealed that she had healed, and she helped to rescue and then teamed up with her mentor and friend Callisto, who we knew before we ever met Marrow as leader of the Morlocks, or previous leader of the Morlocks. That pair would themselves partake of some light terrorism attempts, being bad guys, but not super bad guys, before Sarah was eventually encouraged by Cal to join the X-Men. And it was a rocky start that got less rocky over time, but she was eventually considered one of the team. Writers changed, and she was eventually simply dropped from the roster without explanation, only to resurface as a brainwashed agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., and then later as a member of Weapon X. They augmented her mutation to the extent that her appearance was softer and more sort of classically pretty or beautiful, but she ended up leaving that organization and reforming Gene Nation for a little while. That also was cut short as Agent Zero killed all of the members of Gene Nation, including those that Marrow had known from her time in the Hill Dimension. So other than some minor appearances, she mostly stayed out of the limelight after that. Cable later reformed the Team X-Force in response to the Alexandria incident. And I'm going to take a slight sidetrack here. I'm rereading that series right now, and I don't remember exactly how I phrased it earlier. It's not a bad series, and I do enjoy it. It just, the character of Marrow in it is so different than what we're used to. But the Alexandria incident itself, I was looking for more detail. Literally, it just seems to be that a bad guy is doing some bad guy things, which aren't particularly important, and basically framed mutants for a big explosion that killed thousands of people. And so Cable wanted to form X-Force in response to that, to sort of get to the heart of it and expose it, and beat the big bad guy and all that sort of thing. And Marrow was a part of that. I think, if I understand the comic correctly, I think the intent was to leave Marrow to die in the explosion. The bad guy basically used her depoweredness from M-Day to unlock some technology for himself that he was able to use, and then he was done with her. And it sounds like he meant for her to die in the Alexandria incident, but she didn't. She survived her mutation, but she wasn't really a mutant at that point. The augmented mutation kind of protected her from the explosion. Okay. And also as part of that, she underwent that treatment, and she chose to do that, knowing that she was pregnant at the time and that this would likely cost the life of her child. And then as a result of all of that, when Cable finds her, so as a result of the surgery, she had her memories and her mind sort of suppressed and muddled with. And then Cable also, when she was on the team, had a headband that she wore that would also help to suppress the memories and the trauma and such. So there's a lot of mess going on there in this particular portrayal of Marrow. In the background of it, she's not a mutant in the way that people were either mutants or not mutants, and M-Day was no more mutants. That affected her. She lost her powers at M-Day. This is basically a scientific way around reactivating that mutation, but it was really only part of research for the bad guy. Okay, rabbit trail over. The end result is all of this, it just adds to the trauma of her life. So from there, after that run, the X-Force run, she is eventually brought to Krakoa, and she served most notably so she has some cameos and things, but most recently and most notably, she was working with Magic, Mirage, Dust, and Typhoid Mary in Vanaheim for a short adventure on the 4-part miniseries Realm of X. That's a super broad overview of her presence in comics, but this is just a summary video. So as for her powers, talking more about her powers, they stem from having constant bone growth that often presents as spikes or as scales, sort of outcroppings and growths. The growth was difficult to control at first, but over time and with training, Marrow is able to more or less direct the creation of her jagged protrusions. This evidently puts her in near constant pain as well. And the growth was not just directed outward, but inward. So it was kind of perpetually harming her own internal organs. But again, this too kind of waxes and wanes with the increasing control and with the way the writers want to reference it. The growths could be plucked out or broken off and used as bladed weapons, or they could be fired as projectiles later on. And she could even achieve a limited form of shapeshifting, where she'd actually do things like elongate her limbs or change her skull's shape by manipulating her skeletal structure, and the rest of her body sort of followed suit. So like they didn't, when she makes her fingers turn into talons, for instance, it doesn't rip the muscles off of her fingers. The muscles also kind of grow and stretch with the elongated bone. Let's see. During her time in X-Force, so going back to X-Force briefly, she often made like vertebrate tentacles and massive shields. There's even early on, there's the shot of her like jumping out of a plane, and she's basically just like a bunch of spikes with a head. But knowing that her powers were kind of wonky and how that was all achieved, it's unclear if this is an original use of her mutation or if this is a totally different sort of manifestation altogether. Like I said, it's kind of a bit of a mess. The whole thing's a bit of a mess. Her bones, combined with her enhanced strength, which we would assume mutants in comics were often portrayed as being a little bit sturdier in general, their constitution. And then with Marrow, we see some enhanced strength along the way, or evidence that she has some enhanced strength. And the bones together with that, are capable of piercing concrete, even some forms of metal. And when she used her bones as armor, they appear to have been airtight and able to withstand the vacuum of space. She actually makes a spacesuit out of bones. This mutation is accompanied by a considerable healing factor, of course, and there's considerable evidence to suggest that Marrow also possesses enhanced physical prowess beyond ordinary mutant potential, beyond that normal constitution I was talking about. As well as all of that, she seems to have olfactory senses, sense of smell, which is similar to Logan's, not on par with him, but like that same idea, and also vision that seems to work in near total darkness. While her appearance has changed many times, she originally and then occasionally had pink skin with red hair. Her age is difficult to discern exactly, but given what we remember, or what she remembers and how old she was when Angel was first kidnapped by Callisto, she has a memory of that, and knowing that she aged 20 years in the Hill dimension, and this is kind of contrary to everyone saying that she's a kid, but it's reasonable to place her as probably being in her late 20s or maybe even early 30s. Marvel time is weird, but I think there's, if you figure 20 years in the Hill dimension and she's old enough to remember things that happened before then, she was probably 5 or 6 when she got sent to the Hill dimension, which at the earliest puts her in the second half of the 20s. And then if you kind of age her up over time since then, it feels like she'd be in her late 20s. But again, sliding time scale, right? In terms of personality, she is most often just rude and excessively violent with fierce loyalty to few, though she does have that, and holy reverence for just one person, which is Angel, right? She's like awestruck by Angel. But every other aspect of the character, including that aspect of the character, even her personality, it just shifts depending on what the writer wants to do and what the context is. In the most recent, in the Realm of X series, I think I mentioned this in the last video, she seems to have some sort of like accent or like British. She occasionally uses phrases that just seem, I don't know, it's a different reimagining of the character, I guess. Okay, so one thing I mentioned in the deep dive series that I think is most worth covering here, I did hint at this, I believe, at least once. In this video, we're going to talk about some of the sources that I came across when I was researching the character. They indicated that she was, or I should say they concluded that she was bisexual. And citations seemed mostly to focus on the fact that Marrow was seen as having cut out pictures of magazine models for a collage in her room, or her occasional very aggressive flirting, the story Cat and Mouse with Flag Smasher, where she and Kitty do a team up. More recently, someone pointed to her relationship with her roommate Farrell, something that I'll talk a little bit more in another video about, but which I've also already mentioned, is we have to remember that Marrow's not a real person, and she's a plot device used in fictional narratives that are meant to entertain. So while there are definitely some Marvel characters about whom we can speak more definitively about their sexuality or their orientation or really any other characteristic because there's ample information for it, stories that have focused on it and things, with Marrow, like so many other things, there simply aren't enough data points for me personally to say confidently that Marrow is purposefully and consistently, and I guess those are really two important words here, that she's specifically written to be bisexual. As a plot device, her stories and her arcs, when she ever even gets them, often revolve around the concept of beauty and acceptance, and how she occasionally, often awkwardly, seems to make genuine attempts at friendship and even at romance. In the latter case, though, when we're talking about romance, there are the examples of Remy, Gambit, and Sam Guthrie that come readily to mind. She also has the brief exchange with Zone in the art museum, right? Marrow's hero worship of Warren doesn't appear to me to be romantic at all, and her relationship with Kitty, even in that Cat and Mouse series, it seems more like the writer is contrasting the worldviews. I mean, even the title is Cat and Mouse. It's a compare contrast personalities and worldviews and lived experiences, and they have some jealousy and some frenemy behavior for the drama, right? I don't think that there's romantic overtones between the two of them in the way that we would typically associate with serious romantic efforts, right? Maybe some bludgeoning feelings, or not bludgeoning, blossoming feelings of the concept sort of overall for Marrow, but I just don't see it there. So I absolutely see, I totally agree. I totally see that someone could make that conclusion. I see it there. I absolutely agree. You could make that case. There is some evidence there. for me personally, I don't feel like I can say for sure that she is portrayed that way. I can't make that call one way or the other. And really, I'm calling this out because it didn't really fit in any of the other videos. So I'm sort of calling this out specifically here. But really, it's just another thing about Marrow that is not portrayed consistently or clearly enough to be able to say one way or the other, right? She started out as a terrorist, so she's a terrible person, and then she was reluctant X-Men, so she was a hero, and then she went to Weapon X, so she was kind of a betrayal to her own values and even killed a Morlock, and then she went off and was a terrorist again. I mean, it's really hard to pin down any consistent through line for this character at all, including things like skin color and even mutant powers, right? For somebody who has been in so few comics, relatively speaking, there's just a wide amount of, or a wide range of data that we just see. It just depends on who the writer is, right? So if I was pressed on this issue of romance and who I'd like to see together with Marrow, if I was pressed, because I don't really look for that too much in the comics that I prefer, but if I was pressed, I would want to see more of Sarah and Sam Guthrie. And I don't even know what Sam is up to these days, Cannonball. I imagine that this is probably not something that would fit in a modern story, but I remember the issue where he is meeting her in the park at the end, where Callisto and Storm are like trying to track Marrow down across the city, and then they end up in the little park, and she almost kills the police officers, but she doesn't. And Sam gives her a ride home, and I think that those two, there's some really cool compare contrast from a thematic perspective. You have Sarah, whose mutation causes her pain, and she's far more comfortable underground, and Sam's mutation causes invulnerability, and he's far more comfortable in flight, but of course he has experience underground as well. And she seems so happy. It's one of those rare happiness moments when she gets to hold onto his back and piggyback and fly home at the end of that issue. I would like to see more of that explored if I had to pick, but again, it's not really it's not a hill I would die on, so to speak. All of that is probably a good segue into what kinds of stories that I think Marrow does shine in and what I'd like to see her doing in the future. So the issues that stick in my mind after having read, however many dozens of these are multiple times, and in no particular order, the ones that stick out are the one with Kitty and Flag Smasher, Cat and Mouse, the one with Abomination and Angel, where they kind of, the three of them are down in the sewers, the one where Marrow runs away and Cal and Storm are searching for her that we were just talking about. Sam finds her and they fly away together at the end. Her debut as an adult performing the Ceremony of Light back in X-Men Prime, that little piece with where the visuals are just really so good there, I think. And in a more general sense, I really liked the Spider-Man issues, the issues where she kind of teams up with Spider-Man, the banter that she has with Cecilia Reyes, taking care of Cal. I remember like she has this little angel like doll that she made up that is blue and it looks like Warren, and it's like using it to help Cal feel better, like you would with a teddy bear or something. And just in general, like her awe of Warren Worthington is just so cool. So motifs, those are the kind of the things when I think like, what are the cool parts of the Marrows that I've read, right? Those are kind of the things that stick out first. Motifs like the beauty and appearance as a symbol for acceptance and comfort, her outward disdain and her rudeness as being a cover for a not so callous spirit after all, and finding that or finding her family or home in all of the turmoil, and then, and this is important, right? Finding and then allowing herself to accept that, allowing herself to settle, to be accepted, and to be included. These are the kinds of things that I would like to see more of, and what I would like to see if she had an honest sit down with Angel. That'd be cool. What if she was pressed into taking a more active role in leadership of a team that included veteran ex-people, like with Flag Smasher when she was kind of leading them through the tunnels? What if her past in Gene Nation was brought up by those who might oppose her? You could see some compare contrast, maybe the revelation of Gambit's role in the Mutant Massacre. All of a sudden it's like, well, yeah, that was bad, but remember when you were doing the Gene Nation stuff? Like there could be some cool drama there. What if she orchestrated the performance of the Ceremony of Light on a large scale? Like what if she brings that back? We haven't seen that in a while. What if she has a role somewhere in that? These are kind of the questions and ideas and sort of half thoughts that I have that would really it's where I think the character Marrow could be shown as more than just a stabby, crazy thug girl, which unfortunately I think is kind of her legacy and her fate, right? She's Wolverine light. Going more in depth, and some of these are ideas that I've had for the past year that I've been doing this, or year and a half that I've been doing this. And again, this is in no particular order. So the first one I have is Old Lady Marrow, right? Show me that she survives in the world of Old Man Logan. Show me how she survives. What is her life like? You know, she spent 20 years in the Hill Dimension, so this should be relatively easy. But the risk of going back to that evil Marrow persona, right? That might be too much. So you want to play with that tension, right? Don't fully become the bad guy. But obviously you're going to have to tap into that nature. We've seen the dangers out in the wastelands with Old Man Logan, but what's going on in the tunnels of Manhattan? What's going on the East Coast? Is she reforming a team to strike back at whoever's in charge? Does she make a move to become one of the leaders, one of the barons or governors or whatever? Her healing factor probably does slow her aging, and she doesn't have adamantium poisoning to worry about. So she's probably still a capable fighter on her own anyway. Maybe somebody, and this is sort of more specifically, but maybe somebody is using Angel's bones as relics, right? Because it's kind of a bleak, sort of post-apocalyptic, post-super-apocalyptic setting and atmosphere. So what if it turns out that Angel's bones are being used as like healing remedies, or they're being worshipped or something? She'd be pretty ticked. In fact, I could see an entire story about her going around collecting relics from all of her old teammates. Sam's goggles, or Wolverine is presumably still alive. Even Spider-Man, something to do with Spider-Man, like web shooters or something. Like just going and sort of reclaiming all that from where it's been sort of exploited. And the other thought I had with that setting specifically, and I don't know this, is Laura Kinney around? Because that could be a very interesting team up, I think. Marrow and X-23. I don't know. That could be cool. All right, so kind of old Lady Marrow. Days of Future Past is another one of my favorite settings, much like the Old Lady Marrow, but this time it's more about beating up Sentinels and setting up underground networks and traveling around unseen and establishing bases and all that sort of thing. And this is something that we know she's good at. This is something that Marrow has done and is good at doing. She is a competent leader and she's a competent tracker already. I bet there are Morlocks in a camp somewhere just waiting for rescue. I think that would be a really obvious, natural choice for this character. Another option, Marrow in space. Remember when Gambit Remember when Gambit gravely injured Marrow and used a Skrull mock-up of a Shi'ar medical tech facility, medical pod thing to heal her? Well, remember how then Galactus showed up and ate all of the Skrull homeworld and its moons, and then everyone was all suspicious and remarked about how Marrow was so different. Maybe it's because she was. Maybe the technician that helped, sort of quotes, Gambit, and the machine that Gambit assumed was a regular med pod was actually some kind of cloning device. And since it wasn't really intended for proper use, because the whole thing is just sort of a training ground anyway, maybe the real Marrow is not the one that woke up. When Galactus showed up, maybe her mutation formed a cocoon, a bony cocoon around her to like protect her. And she just kind of was like hurled out into space with some debris, right? And in sort of a torpor state, like comatose state, right? And she gets picked up by someone. Maybe it's like, I don't know who the comic counterpart to the Ravagers are, but the MCU calls them the Ravagers. But like Ravagers or Starjammers, maybe it's just some junkers or some slavers that are out looking to make some coin, and they find this sort of floating bony asteroid thing. Maybe due to all the trauma, Marrow wakes up and she's kind of feral at first and starts taking people out, or she ends up rescuing other captives. She ends up becoming the captain of the ship, maybe captain of a spaceship. How awesome is that? Maybe she doesn't get discovered at all. Maybe she crash lands on a planet somewhere where there's creatures that only wake up every century, and when all the planets align and there's a solar eclipse, and she has to help the few remaining survivors to last the weekend, sort of Pitch Black style, right? Or maybe it's not Pitch Black. Maybe it's just that the planet is being overrun by the Brood, and she has to fight off the Brood. She's sort of the last hope of this people on this planet. I just love those ideas. So like, put her in space, right? It all works. How about the spider meme, right? The Spider-Man pointing at each other, the healing, the doppelganger, Galactus, the bone cocoon, all of that, only she just lands on Earth. She crash lands on Earth. She didn't have hyperspace or anything, so she arrives much later, maybe even now, like in modern times. It's the classic rude girl Marrow, and she's kind of ticked that there's another one who's running around with her face. So what would that be like if Marrow from back then suddenly shows up today, and how would that play out? I think that could be cool. How about this one? There and Back Again. We know the Ceremony of Light is somehow connected to the Hill Dimension, and it's also connected to the native entity that possessed Mikhail. So what if Marrow decided that internationally recognized sovereign islands weren't really where it's at? and decided to lead a team back to that dimension to resettle it. It's harsh. Without Mikhail, though, maybe things are different. In fact, because of time dilation, that dimension probably looks really different now. So maybe there's some folks there in need of mentoring that have sort of evolved or grown or maybe found that dimension. And maybe they're in need of mentoring. Maybe they're in need of leadership or organization or protecting, or maybe they're in need of punching. What about that entity, the green glowy entity that was possessing Mikhail? Was it a malevolent being? Was it just trying to save its realm? With all of the mutant powers and all of the tech that we have floating around, certainly we could come up with some sort of portal system or a time synchronization device so that traveling back and forth could be possible without too much of a mess. But that could just be really fun, right? Go back there. And then, of course, classic idea, just mix and match all these ideas, right? What if the space cocoon and the torpor, but she crash lands on the Old Man Logan world, right? What if she's a space captain who finally returns to Earth, but it's been overrun by Sentinels? Maybe the planet that's been overrun by Brood looks so familiar because it's really the Hill Dimension, and it's, a century or two into the future. Somehow she ended up through space getting to the Hill Dimension. You could also just toss in your Marvel mantle of choice. What would Marrow be like as a Ghost Rider or a Herald of Galactus or the Punisher? Any of these kinds, in any of that, in any kind of setting that we've already discussed. Just go wild, mix and match, really dig in and lean into the ridiculous mess that the 90s gave us in this wonderful, messy character. But lastly, if we're going to be proper, if we're going to respect the canon, all right, and we say that there's one Marrow this whole time, and all of it is canon, even the X-Force and the Realm of X stuff, so what are we going to do about that? Well, I do think, and this is another plug, I do think that Infinity Arc by Zach Thompson was a great start. I really liked it. I'm not spoiling it for you. If you have access to find it yourself, it's a really quick read, and it's really cool. I really liked that arc. Give her a squad that protects a small town somewhere, complete with some tunnel networks that access the alley or something where the Morlocks can live. Let them run legitimate businesses in the Upworld, like the Princess Bar, which is I think is a thing now. It was in more than one comic. So maybe do something sort of like Heroes for Hire, but they're mutants, but more localized, right? Gene Nation's original resettlement, Gene Nation's original resentment of Upworlders was based on some half-truths, I think, right? It was a perception, I think, and there was a lot of rage there. But you'll remember that Marrow specifically mentioned that she was disappointed in Storm. She was disappointed that Storm wasn't the one who was able to lead them into the light. And obviously Callisto didn't do that either. So let Marrow do it. Let her be the one to bridge that gap, right? Whatever it looks like. And I think it probably is small. I think having a storefront or having the Princess Bar, like, I don't know, even just a small town or something like that, but have it upworld as well as below and allow that transition to happen. And Marrow being a big part of that could be really cool. It's not more recent at this point, but the Moon Knight series, he sort of has his territory. Daredevil sort of, Hell's Kitchen watches that. What if Marrow has kind of an area like that, right? That's kind of what I'm getting at. Whatever you do, don't give her a last name, okay? Don't do that. If you really want to give some kind of cool, nerdy homage to source material, have a place in the town called Mercury Springs. And the true Marrow fans, the true Morlock fans, the true really devoted fanboys and fangirls and diehard people for this sort of lore are going to understand the reference. And I think that's just really cool. You could do cool things like that. So anyway, the video is longer than I anticipated it being because I love rabbit trails, but these are just some ideas, some thoughts, some things that came along the way, as well as, of course, being an overview of the character. And if you want to know more, go ahead and watch the deep dive series. There's other videos out there that are good. There's other videos out there that are obviously written by bots and incorrect. One of them, I think I mentioned in the first video, one of them talks about how Sarah grew up in a place called Morlocks. yeah, that's not a trustworthy video. don't rely on those videos. Okay. If you have access to things like Marvel Unlimited, you can go and read most of these. In fact, I think there was actually, in all of this, I think there was only one comic I had to kind of guess at, because I was able to get to most of them through Marvel Unlimited. So it's definitely, these are all accessible out there. And I encourage you to go read them if you want to learn more about the character, or you want to read some of these cool stories yourself. But all that being said, I hope you learned something. If you didn't, I hope you at least enjoyed the journey. And yeah, I love the character. I'm thank you for the opportunity, for tolerating me taking such a drastic turn from my normal Cortex content and being able to just kind of geek out about this character that I just really loved and spent so long reading and learning about. And I hope that in some way you also have a better appreciation, better understanding of the character as well. So moving on, I have one more video that I want to do, but it's less about Marrow. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do that one before this one or not. I made this choice. The next video then is going to be more about general stuff, like with narratives and stories and Marvel stories and heroes and that sort of, maybe the genre. It's kind of more of a genre video or discussion. Well, it's not a discussion, it's just me, but I want to talk a little bit about that, which was sort of a result of my diving into this character in particular, and just some kind of thoughts that didn't really fit anywhere else. So I think that's going to be the next video. And then we'll probably do some, well, probably, almost certainly we'll get back to some Cortex stuff. And maybe we'll do some Marrow-centric Cortex stuff. Maybe we'll take one of these ideas and go through a solo play and play it out or something like that. It can be fun. It can be good times. All right, that's all I have to say for today. Again, thanks so much for watching, and thanks so much for staying with me if you've been with me the whole time. And thanks so much for joining if you just got on board in the last couple weeks. I appreciate you all so much, and I will catch you next time. Excelsior.